After months of cryptic absences and swirling speculation, King Charles shatters the palace's strategic silence. But this isn't a standard royal statement. It's a deeply personal, confessional unraveling. What compels the monarch to break centuries-old protocol and expose the raw truth behind his heir's solo journey to America? What was once dismissed as diplomatic duty now conceals something far more dangerous. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The recording begins with the unmistakable weariness of a man burdened by more than just a crown. In a low, uneven voice, King Charles speaks not as a sovereign, but as a father cracking under the weight of decades-long secrets. "There comes a time," he mutters, "when even silence becomes betrayal." What follows is not polished, not rehearsed, but devastatingly raw. He references a rift that threatened more than the crown, hinting at a decision that tore at the foundations of both the monarchy and his own family. "My greatest fear as a father," he says, "was that I would lose both my sons not to scandal, but to silence, to what we buried too deep." The audio, clearly never intended for public ears, was leaked anonymously to a foreign media outlet just after midnight. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. The palace scrambled to contain it, issuing carefully worded denials and labeling it as private archival material taken out of context. But the damage was done. The recording's authenticity is all but confirmed by the voices in the corridors of Buckingham. Aides and insiders, speaking off the record, claim the audio was recorded during a private consultation, possibly with a royal archivist, where Charles, shaken by recent events, began reflecting on a pivotal moment tied to William's abrupt American voyage. The implications are staggering. This wasn't just an emotional reckoning, it was a breach of the royal code, one that forbids spontaneous disclosures, especially when the monarchy's future is on the line. Some believe the king was pressured, emotionally or politically, to speak. Others suspect this was a deliberate maneuver to preempt what William himself may soon reveal from across the Atlantic. The timing, many note, is too precise to be coincidence. And then, the absences. Camilla, who normally stands beside Charles during such critical moments, is nowhere to be seen. Neither present during the recording, nor in any of the carefully managed media rebuttals, her silence has sparked a tidal wave of speculation. Some suggest she warned against the confession, others whisper of deeper fractures behind closed doors. The image of a divided monarchy is no longer a media fabrication, it's unfolding in real time. As Charles's voice fades in the final seconds of the audio, one line rings louder than the rest. "The decision to send him alone was mine, and I regret it more than I can ever say." But if the king's words rattled the gates, what forced Prince William to cross the Atlantic alone would rupture the very heart of the monarchy. Prince William's quiet arrival in the United States was meant to be routine, but sources now confirm the heir wasn't sent abroad to represent the crown. He was deployed to bury a secret, one that could tear the royal family apart if uncovered. And he wasn't supposed to be alone. The cover story was polished and palatable. A diplomatic tour, a few public engagements, some climate summit panels, and quiet evenings behind embassy gates. But beneath the surface, a different narrative churned, one kept deliberately off record, one that began long before William boarded the jet with only a skeletal staff and no senior royals at his side. The official itinerary was vague, but what little was known contradicted the urgency of his departure. According to insiders, William had just 48 hours' notice. The decision came directly from Charles, against Kensington Palace's strategic advice. William was reportedly furious. There were heated words, but he boarded the plane anyway because he knew this wasn't about diplomacy. This was about survival. In Washington, a sealed corridor was booked inside a government-secured building with no press access, no transcripts, and no digital footprints. It wasn't just about meetings, it was about erasure. William met privately with a group of legal experts tied to an obscure royal trust fund, one last updated in the 1980 seconds. This fund, dormant for decades, allegedly held documentation that predated Prince William's public designation as heir. Why now? Why revisit a trust buried beneath layers of post-war royal discretion? Rumors are relentless. Someone's challenging the very foundation of succession, and it's not an outsider, it's someone within the family. While William reviewed sealed documents and tried to trace decades-old signatures, another storm brewed from California. Meghan Markle's legal team, tipped off by anonymous sources, had already begun preparing a counterstrike. A team of attorneys, some of whom had been involved in Harry's initial severance arrangements, were reactivated. Their goal? To challenge the legitimacy of the documents William was trying to secure. One source close to the Sussex legal circle hinted that a revelation about William would reopen all conversations about representation and entitlement. It was a dangerous chess match, with the line of succession itself in question. Back home, Catherine was kept from travelling. Publicly, it was framed as a precaution due to her health, or her children's schedule, or vague national obligations. Privately, sources suggest she was intentionally sidelined. Her presence, it seems, would have drawn unwanted attention to the nature of William's trip. Some within the palace feared she would question the mission publicly. Others believed she was a liability too loyal to the truth, too unwilling to play along with Camilla's strategy. Catherine's silence during these crucial days was deafening. Even American media outlets, normally relentless in their royal coverage, stayed unusually quiet. Journalists reported receiving formal discouragement from UK intermediaries. Some editors received what they described as unprecedented pressure to avoid speculation. When William's arrival wasn't even covered by major networks, alarm bells rang. This wasn't diplomacy. This was damage control, buried beneath rehearsed smiles and forced handshakes, the kind of silence that screams when you know what to listen for. But the urgency of the trip wasn't just legal, it was emotional. A single message delivered the night before William departed would change everything. An envelope, no return address, sealed with a crest no longer in use, hand-delivered to Clarence House just after midnight. Its contents, a revelation so seismic, it sent Prince William into a spiral and forced King Charles into an impossible decision. The envelope arrived in silence, bypassing the usual chain of protocol and gatekeeping that surrounds the royal residences. The courier, a retired palace clerk no longer listed on staff, was waved through with a nod, as if some old understanding still held power within the walls. The moment it reached Charles's private study, the mood reportedly shifted. A single glance at the seal, faded but unmistakable, sent a ripple of dread through the few aides present. It bore the personal insignia of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, used only in highly sensitive correspondence. Within moments, William was summoned, not through aides or intermediaries, but directly, by his father's own trembling voice on the line. What lay inside the envelope would ignite a chain reaction none of them were prepared for. A copy of a rarely referenced clause from a post-war royal will long believed to have been buried in archival obscurity, addressed a bloodline reassessment in the event of political destabilization or unforeseen hereditary discrepancies. It was not written in vague legalese, but in the deliberate handwriting of the Queen Mother herself. Alongside it, a faded black and white photograph showing two infants side by side, one marked official, the other protected. And finally, a signed confession from the late Baron Eddington, the Queen Mother's private legal counsel, admitting his role in concealing a delicate matter of succession, under direct instruction and for the preservation of national stability. William reportedly went silent for nearly 20 minutes after reading it. The colour drained from his face. What he had just uncovered didn't merely rattle his understanding of the royal bloodline, it destabilized it. The name of the protected child, redacted in part, suggested either a twin or a disputed heir long hidden from public view. A ghost claim, possibly covered up during the tumultuous post-war years, had now returned with damning force. The implications were immediate and unbearable. This wasn't just about the past, it threatened everything William was meant to inherit. King Charles, upon learning what the envelope contained, called for his son, and ordered the room cleared. Camilla, who had already sensed something extraordinary was unfolding, was explicitly barred from attending. That decision alone sent shockwaves through the palace hierarchy. Their private meeting reportedly lasted nearly 2 hours. Raised voices were heard. At one point, a vase was shattered. But no one knows precisely what agreement, if any, was reached between father and son during that conversation. What is known, however, is that by morning, the envelope was gone. The last verified sighting of the document was just hours before William boarded his flight to America. A senior security aide reported seeing it tucked inside a reinforced briefcase, marked with royal diplomatic seals. Once airborne, all tracking of the case ceased. The American end was warned to expect a sealed package of national interest, but when William arrived, that language had mysteriously disappeared from all manifests. Wherever the envelope is now, its contents have set a fire beneath the royal family that no statement, no protocol, no silence can extinguish. As William faced a ghost from the past, another figure prepared to expose the monarchy's most damning vulnerability. Before he boarded the plane, Catherine confronted him. Her voice was calm, but her words cut deep. "They're setting you up, William. This isn't protection, it's erasure." What did she know that Charles refused to say? And why did she insist that Camilla's fingerprints were all over the operation? What was meant to be a quiet morning between husband and wife turned into a desperate standoff. Catherine, having spent the last 72 hours poring over confidential records and encrypted internal correspondences, had uncovered something so disturbing that it left her sleepless and hollow-eyed. Hidden within a subsection of the Royal Archives files, accessible only through a decaying code known as Protocol Clarion, were altered versions of Prince William's original birth documentation. Dates misaligned by a full week, signatures replicated but subtly different. A sealed annex marked Internal Memoranda, Custodial Oversight, with no clear author. To the untrained eye, it would seem like bureaucratic noise, but Catherine, trained not only in duty but in silence, understood exactly what she was looking at. These were not clerical mistakes. They were calculated edits, and the implications were terrifying. Catherine sought answers from those few she still trusted. It was Princess Anne, ever the steel beneath the crown, who gave the most chilling response. After hearing the details, Anne leaned in and whispered, "The truth undoes thrones." That was all. No elaboration, no defense, just that. With time slipping away and the plane already being prepped, Catherine did what she feared she might never be able to do again, she begged. She pleaded with William not to go, not to walk blindly into a trap laid out by those who would rather erase him than explain him. She warned that this wasn't diplomacy, it was containment, and at the heart of it, she believed, stood Camilla, but her resistance did not go unnoticed. Within hours, Catherine was pulled from public duties and issued a health advisory statement through Palace PR, resting quietly due to exhaustion, it said. The truth was far more sinister. Palace handlers, many loyal not to the crown but to Camilla's rising inner circle, isolated her from staff, restricted her communications, and reportedly intercepted messages she had attempted to send to Princess Beatrice and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. Behind closed doors, Catherine's influence was being methodically dismantled. But even in enforced silence, her final warning echoed louder than any press statement. If he leaves, you won't bring him back whole. Tensions between Catherine and Camilla had always simmered just beneath the surface, masked by forced smiles and ceremonial civility. But now, the veil had been lifted. The quiet war between Queen Consort and future Queen had turned personal, ruthless, and irreversible. While William packed his case under the impression of duty, Catherine saw it for what it truly was, a cold operation to corner him with no allies, no press, and no family at his side. She wasn't just afraid for his safety, she was terrified of what would be done in his name while he was gone. And while Catherine stood guard over their legacy, Charles finally faced the origin of the fracture he could no longer ignore. For decades, one vault remained untouched in Althorpe at Diana's own request, but a single line in the mysterious envelope forced Charles to demand its opening. What he found inside wasn't just a letter, it was a mother's last line of defense for the son she feared would one day be erased. The Spencer family had always been the reluctant keepers of secrets too dangerous for the crown to contain. But this one, buried deep within a reinforced vault beneath Althorp's ancestral walls, was different. It wasn't just hidden from the public, it was hidden from history. And for years, Charles had respected Diana's final request that the vault remain sealed unless the monarchy faced a reckoning from within. That reckoning had now arrived. The envelope William received in Clarence House, referencing a second birthright under threat, included a handwritten directive from Baron Eddington, citing a sealed statement from Diana that corresponds to Clause 4 of the Spencer Custodial Agreement. Charles, driven by a mix of desperation and guilt, placed the call himself. Earl. Spencer didn't hesitate. The vault was unlocked at sunrise. Inside, wrapped in aged ivory ribbon, was a leather-bound journal labelled in Diana's unmistakable cursive, for William's reckoning. Alongside it, a standard Maxell audio cassette, dated 1996. The journal was not a chronological diary, but a series of fragmented entries, pleas, warnings, questions, and codes. Her writing was disjointed at times, emotionally raw, filled with fear but laced with quiet rage. Again and again, one phrase reappeared in bold lettering. They are preparing for a different heir. She spoke of private conversations overheard between aides loyal to Prince Philip, of sudden archival disappearances, and of a name that haunts the crown, the Winter Child. No context, no explanation, only a whisper into a void that no one had dared acknowledge until now. The final paragraph of the journal stopped Charles cold. According to those present, he sat in complete silence for over 10 minutes, before quietly asking everyone to leave the room. When aides returned, they found him in tears. One described it as a scream on paper. Though the palace has never confirmed the text, insiders claim it contained a chilling prophecy. He will be rewritten if you remain silent. Do not let protocol steal his face from history. That night, the king reportedly cancelled all engagements and retreated to Sandringham without explanation. The cassette tape was no less haunting. On it, Diana's voice quivers as she details a secret meeting with a royal genealogist arranged by Lord Mountbatten's former secretary. She speaks of inconsistencies in lineage records and a fabricated silence approved in exchange for obedience. At one point, she names individuals, some of whom are still active within the inner royal apparatus. The tape ends abruptly, with Diana stating, "If this never reaches you, then know they always planned for it to vanish with me." Earl Spencer, once determined to remain silent, is now reportedly under pressure to speak publicly. Journalists have been seen near Althorp in increasing numbers. The Spencer family's role in this emerging storm is no longer peripheral, it is foundational. The vault has cracked open something far larger than bloodlines. It's torn the veil off a monarchy desperate to preserve its illusion of control. But the truth about bloodlines wasn't the only danger someone had been watching from the shadows, waiting for the royal family to implode. Buried in the palace's legal chambers is a memo marked for contingency activation. Its author? Camilla. Its subject? William. As Catherine suspected, the Queen Consort had long prepared a plan B, one that would ensure her bloodline reigned, no matter what Charles revealed. The memo, now whispered about behind the heavy doors of the Royal Legal Council, was not written in haste. It was drafted with precision, months before Charles's health began to visibly deteriorate, months before the first rumours of succession interference started to leak. At its centre was a chilling phrase: alternate succession protections, linked to an obscure but still binding clause buried in post-Windsor Protocol, known only to a select few as the Sunset Clause. A clause originally devised in the aftermath of Edward VIII's abdication, designed to remove an heir deemed a national liability under extraordinary circumstances. Until now, it had never been invoked. But Camilla's memo did more than reference it. It strategized its use. The document outlines a scenario in which William could be quietly stripped of his official status if certain hereditary inconsistencies or destabilizing emotional fractures were confirmed. It stopped just short of accusing him outright of illegitimacy, but it did something perhaps even more dangerous. It planted seeds. Seeds that questioned Prince George's standing. In a veiled legal paragraph, it proposed a full review of hereditary entitlement in light of evolving archival evidence. That phrase, buried beneath formal language, sent a shiver through those who read it. This wasn't just about William, it was about dismantling the line entirely. Worse still, Camilla's influence had already begun to infect the corridors of power. Multiple sources confirm that select members of the House of Lords were given hypothetical succession briefings weeks before the memo came to light. Among them were peers with long-standing ties to the Parker Bowles family and known sympathies toward recalibrating the monarchy in a post-Charles era. Behind closed doors, phrases like stabilizing the next generation and securing the throne's continuity began to circulate. But when the memo's contents leaked internally, all eyes turned to one elusive name printed at the bottom of the legal draft: the barrister. No one in the current legal team claims to know the true identity behind the title. Some believe it's a former palace solicitor who disappeared from public duty over a decade ago. Others suggest it's a code name used to protect a foreign legal strategist aligned with Camilla's old social circles. But what's undeniable is this: the barrister was not only the memo's architect, but its shield. Camilla has since denied any association with the document, calling it a fabrication and a smear designed to sow division. Yet digital access logs show the file was opened from her private residence's encrypted server and last edited under an account with royal administrative clearance. That kind of digital footprint doesn't lie. This wasn't a spontaneous contingency. It was a controlled detonation, timed with the fragility of Charles's health and the chaos surrounding William's mission abroad. Camilla had anticipated resistance. She had planned for confusion. But what she hadn't expected was the emergence of hidden archives, long silenced voices, and a royal heir unwilling to be erased quietly. Yet even as plots brewed and truths surfaced, William's mission in America reached an unexpected twist, one final encounter no one saw coming. No press, no security cameras, no entourage. In a remote vineyard in California, William met the one person he thought he'd lost forever, his brother, and in that silence, truths were exchanged that could end the monarchy as we know it. The meeting wasn't just unannounced, it was orchestrated with surgical precision. Only two people in the royal family had the trust and discretion to pull it off: Princess Eugenie and Lady Sarah Chatto. Neither was considered part of the inner power circle, but both had remained quietly loyal to the memory of Diana and to the fractured bond between her sons. The rendezvous point, a secluded estate in Napa Valley, had no formal connection to the royal family, allowing them to vanish from radar without raising questions. William arrived in a government vehicle, Harry in a borrowed car. No aides, no documentation, just blood, broken trust, and the unbearable weight of all that had been hidden between them. What followed was not a reunion, it was a reckoning. William opened the briefcase he had guarded since boarding the flight from London. Inside, the envelope, Diana's journal entries, and a digital copy of the audio cassette. When he slid them across the table, Harry's expression shifted from guarded confusion to something far more volatile. Fury, shock, then finally, collapse. According to a source close to Eugenie, Harry's hands trembled as he admitted he, too, had received a letter from their mother, one sent anonymously years ago, without explanation or verification. But it hadn't matched what William held. His version omitted the Winter Child reference, excluded mentions of succession tampering, and framed Diana's concerns as paranoia, not prophecy. The realization hit him like a betrayal from beyond the grave. For a long time, neither spoke. Then the silence broke not with words, but with tears. Two brothers, once inseparable, had spent nearly a decade watching each other through headlines and accusations. But here, surrounded by nothing but open air and unspeakable truths, they finally wept together. It wasn't reconciliation, it was mourning. Mourning for what had been taken, manipulated, rewritten. The monarchy had weaponized their love, their pain, their story. But now, William needed something more than healing. He needed Harry's voice. William made a quiet plea, not as a prince, but as a brother. He asked Harry to return to England, not for duty, not for show, but as a witness to what had been hidden and to whom it had been hidden from. He needed Harry to help bring forward the evidence, to verify Diana's words, to stand not just beside him, but before the world. It was a risk neither had imagined taking, and it would come at a cost neither had fully calculated. But the moment demanded more than silence. It demanded sacrifice. Reports later surfaced that Meghan had strongly opposed the meeting, calling it a strategic ambush masked as forgiveness. But Harry, for the first time in years, stood apart from the narrative that had defined him. This wasn't about optics. It was about legacy, one that had been manipulated for decades, and for once, he wasn't running from it. He was walking straight into it. As the brothers faced their shared legacy, King Charles made the most dangerous move of all, preparing to speak publicly for the first time. Dressed in black, seated alone, and visibly aged, King Charles appears on a surprise royal broadcast. What he says will split the monarchy in two. This is not a king speaking as sovereign. This is a father confessing sins, shielding truths, and perhaps for the first time, speaking without a palace script. There was no announcement, no scheduled media slot, just a jarring break in programming across British television as the royal insignia faded in, and Charles's face appeared hollowed, tense, but resolute. The palace hadn't prepared the world for this moment because the palace hadn't known. Not even Camilla. What followed wasn't polished rhetoric or diplomatic distancing. It was raw confession. "I owe the nation the truth," Charles began, "and I owe my son justice." The silence that followed those words was heavier than any formal address he had ever given. And then came the blow that detonated every illusion of control. He confirmed the envelope, the letter, the journal, all of it. The material William had carried to America, the contents of Diana's voice from beyond the grave. It was real. And the monarchy had known, if not in full, then in part, known and suppressed. Charles didn't explain every detail. He didn't name the winter child. He didn't outline the full implications of what Diana had recorded. But he did something no monarch in modern memory had dared. He acknowledged the cover-up. He called it secrecy fueled by fear, not malice, a statement that would send historians and constitutional experts into chaos. He admitted that the choices made in the years after Diana's death were driven by desperation to preserve the monarchy in a moment of collapse. And in doing so, he shattered decades of silence. "There are things I did not say," he whispered, "because I believed silence would protect the realm. But silence has cost us more than truth ever could." The broadcast was not pre-cleared by royal advisors. Panic erupted behind palace walls. Camilla, reportedly blindsided, was in a private meeting when the transmission began. Senior aides flooded communication lines, trying to halt the feed, but the message had already reached millions. Charles didn't consult the Privy Council. He didn't notify Parliament. This wasn't policy, it was reckoning. And it ended with a single cryptic sentence. "What was hidden shall now guide us forward." No elaboration, no explanation, just a quiet declaration that left the nation gripped by awe and uncertainty. For some, it was the most courageous moment of his reign. For others, it marked the beginning of a monarchy fractured beyond repair. The fallout was immediate. Media networks scrambled to interpret the broadcast, dissecting each syllable like a revelation. Public reactions split sharply. Some saw Charles as a man freeing his family from a generational curse. Others saw a monarch surrendering authority in the face of personal guilt. Yet no one could deny its weight. This wasn't just an announcement, it was a rupture. The symbolic order that had defined Britain for generations had been irrevocably altered in 11 minutes of unfiltered grief and confession. But while the world reels from Charles's confession, one last shockwave awaits William's return, and the final reveal of the royal family's next chapter. Prince William steps off the plane with no smile. No wave, just a briefcase in hand. The documents inside are set to detonate the royal order. What he does next won't just define his reign. It will decide whether the monarchy survives the storm or collapses under its secrets. There was no red carpet, no family waiting at the tarmac, no cameras permitted beyond the perimeter. William returned to Britain not as a figurehead, but as a man carrying the burden of 1,000 years of curated silence. The briefcase he clutched never left his hand from airstrip to motorcade. Inside were the originals, Diana's sealed confession, the envelope from Clarence's house, the cassette, and the memo Camilla had tried to deny. His first order of business was not to speak, but to act. Within hours of his return, his legal team filed an unprecedented appeal to the Crown Archives, demanding the full release of genealogical records tied to the House of Windsor and its extended bloodlines. It was a move so aggressive that even seasoned constitutional lawyers called it monarchy-altering. The reaction was immediate and seismic. Public pressure began to swell, no longer just a whisper among anti-monarchists or palace skeptics. This time, it came from loyalists, supporters of the royal family who now felt deceived, betrayed, and used. Petitions called for Camilla's resignation from her ceremonial duties. Protests outside Parliament bore signs reading, "Not my Queen," and "Restore Diana's line." Even some members of the House of Lords broke protocol to request an emergency debate on the role of the Queen Consort in the line of succession crisis. But it wasn't rage alone driving the public sentiment. It was grief. Grief for a monarchy built on hidden fractures, and for a legacy that no longer knew its reflection. Then, without warning, Catherine re-emerged. After weeks of eerie silence and confinement, she walked into Windsor Chapel wearing one unmistakable emblem, Diana's sapphire brooch. Not borrowed, claimed. There were no words spoken to the press, but none were needed. The message was clear. The fight was not over, and she would not be sidelined. Her presence rallied a nation in freefall. Newspapers hailed her as the future's shield, while royal commentators scrambled to assess the implications. The palace's narrative was unraveling, and Catherine had just reignited the public's faith in William's vision for a monarchy reborn, not rewritten. Shortly after, Windsor issued a press bulletin unlike any in recent history. Prince William would deliver a live address to the nation, unfiltered, unaided, and unprecedented. Dubbed the Citizens' Address, it would not be held from Buckingham or Downing Street, but from a quiet chamber in Windsor Castle. The symbolism was potent. Not power, but legacy. Not heritage, but honesty. As preparations began, George and Charlotte were quietly moved out of public view, deliberately. William knew this wasn't the moment for appearances. It was a moment to sever the monarchy's dependence on performance and reforge it with truth. And as the address drew closer, a final whisper began to surface in media circles, picked up by anonymous sources and former aides alike, that William's next words wouldn't just be about confession, but about reformation. That he was preparing not just to expose the crown's darkest secrets, but to rewrite its future. With every breath, the kingdom braced itself, not for the end, but for a reckoning centuries in the making. And as the dust settles and the nation holds its breath, one question remains. Will truth redeem the crown or destroy it? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.